The Stanley Cup Playoffs are off to a roaring start. Let's dive into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Theory of Hockey. I am your host, Nick Zararis. On today's show, we are going to dive into some of my big storylines, some of my big takeaways from the first weekend of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. We will also dive into the Ducks-Oilers series, which starts tonight, Monday night. And then to round out today's show, we'll talk a little bit about some of the adjustments and curiosities I have going forward. Okay, to start out, going into this weekend, I wasn't sure what we were going to get in a couple of these series. Ottawa and Carolina, very much what you expected. I have a quick hits section, which we'll do in a little bit, but that game, exactly what you expected. A slog, difficult to get a lot of space. Decent goaltending. I was a little surprised to see Frederik Andersen get the nod for Carolina. We talked mostly about the Bussy versus Kochetkov dynamic, but Andersen ultimately got the start there. Ullmark gave up a stinker, which, he's prone to do. He doesn't have a great playoff track record. Dallas, Minnesota, that was a mud stomping. Minnesota came out flying. They got going really early and scored quick. But my favorite game of the weekend so far, and this might surprise you a little bit, Montreal, Tampa Bay went to overtime, and Buffalo, Boston. Buffalo has the great 3-goal comeback in the third period. My favorite game of the weekend, and the one I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about in this opening segment, Flyers Penguins on Saturday night was an incredible thought exercise. And the reason I find a series like that really interesting is that those two teams, both in the regular season, what they like to do is in direct contrast with each other. The Penguins have outscored their problems this year. Defensively, the Penguins are an average at best team. You think about the personnel they feature, Erik Karlsson, Parker Wotherspoon, Samuel Girard, and you go down the list, Chris Letang, who had a really rough year. Letang and Girard had a really rough game Saturday night, if I remember correctly, something like a 3% expected goal share. And the Flyers, on the other end of the spectrum, the Flyers are, by all accounts, a borderline, dare I say, elite defensive team. 4th in shot attempts against per 60, 5th in goals against per 60, 3rd in expected goals against per 60, and 3rd in high danger chances against per 60. In direct contrast, playing a Pittsburgh team that wants to score, that wants to open games up, to play a little bit less defense, to take some of the heat off of their guys, and you put that in direct contrast with a Flyers team that likes playing defense, that would say, we are a defense-first team. Our defense wins us games. And how you game that out as a decision maker, as whether you're Dan Muse or whether you're Rick Tocchet, what are you willing to concede from what your goals are to try and create what you need? And the comparison I had made in that series in particular, and the Flyers at large, the path for the Flyers is reminiscent of what we saw from the Islanders in the earlier part of this decade, the 2020, 2021. You could throw 2019 in there, although they didn't go to a conference final the way the subsequent two teams did. But those Islander teams, you think about Matt Barzal being the sole star on those teams. Sure, Brock Nelson has become a real late bloomer, and you could say he's a borderline star. He made the American Olympic team. You think about some of the other pieces on those teams, like a Anders Lee, but that team also featured weird players like Leo Komarov, who played first-line minutes on that team at points over the course of 2 or 3 seasons. But that team at large was a product of its defense and its goaltending. And it's a little bit of a trick or a trap we fall into when we evaluate teams that lean on their defense, that lean on their goaltending to win, because we look at that as being deficient. And I'm guilty of that as well. We look at teams that lean on their defense and goaltending as deficient because of where we're at as a league right now. There is an implied understanding, and we all know it. There is an implied understanding that offense wins in today's game, that it is too difficult to try and prevent offense, that you are better off conceding defense under the pretext of creating more offense. And on Saturday night, the Flyers, who I expected would spend a lot of the game in their own end, would spend a lot of time playing prevent defense, trying to keep everything in front of them, limit the chances, and then spring off the counter. Saturday night, that was not the case. The Penguins were really off kilter, I felt quite a bit that the Penguins looked out of sorts. And when you're a team like Pittsburgh, who's overachieved all year, you got career years from guys like Anthony Mantha, like Justin Brazeau, there is a little bit of a diamond tester element to the postseason where we're going to see just how real what you accomplished was in the regular season. And we all kind of have those bellwether indicators where is what a guy did in the regular season, especially if it's an outlier amongst the other parts of their career, how real is it and how likely is it to translate to what we see in the playoffs? We're all aware playoff hockey is different. Now, the way playoff hockey manifests differently is it's different than the way you would think about football or baseball. You know, in the postseason in baseball, there is a real impetus to look for those home runs and to really work counts. You work counts to make that starting pitcher labor, try and get the starting pitcher out of the game as early as possible to get to the bullpen. The pitchers in the bullpen, other than the closer and on good teams, the setup guy, aren't going to be as good as the starting pitcher you're facing. So you'll have a matchup advantage. At the very least, you will have a matchup advantage when a team has to go to a middle reliever early in the game. And then that has a trickle-down effect where if you make that other team burn relievers earlier in the series and they have to come in with less rest later on in the series, you have a real advantage beyond matchup of a lower quality player versus one of your regular 9 hitters. Then you got a tired or an overworked reliever in the mix. That helps your advantage even more. In football, we see more of an emphasis on the run game, on keeping the clock moving, on trying to minimize the number of possessions in a game to keep the game close and to give your team a better chance of winning. And in hockey, it manifests in a very oxymoronic way. Typically speaking, we would say playoff hockey plays faster. The game processes faster. You would think a game that moves faster would skew towards offense, that if the puck is moving constantly, if players are skating as hard as they can because the game is at a faster pace, you would expect more offense and more room. As the gold medal game at the Olympics proved, and as the games over the course of Saturday and Sunday of this past weekend proved, there is not more space out there. If anything, the emphasis on responsibility, on tight forechecking, even if the game is being played faster, makes it so that there isn't as much room and that you do have to make decisions faster. And for me, that is really the dichotomy. It's not just that you have to make the play faster, you have to make your decisions faster. And that, for me, is the single biggest dividing line in the playoffs when we talk about how guys go out there and play. Of course, the more talented you are, the more leeway you have, the more plays you're capable of making. But when we're talking about teams that are consistent, you know, the thing about the Florida Panthers the last 2.5 seasons, they don't make a lot of mistakes. And that is very mind-numbing analysis. That's what you hear people like Michael Strahan say on the Fox pregame show. That's what you hear PK Subban say during an intermission report. Don't make mistakes. It's not just don't make mistakes. It's trying to minimize the environments that create those mistakes. I think my biggest pet peeve when we're watching playoff hockey is when a defensive group, and I include the forwards in that when I say defensive group, when a team is consistently getting hemmed in their own zone and they can't break out successfully, the forwards need to come back. The forwards need to make themselves available to receive that first breakout pass, to try and withstand the forecheck. The amount of times between 2022 and 2024 where the Rangers would spend 45 seconds in their own zone, there were no forwards within 20 feet of the defenseman with the puck on their stick. That defenseman would eat a hit from a forechecker, the puck would die, the play would stay in the zone, and even if that sequence doesn't result in a goal against, you tired guys out. Guys absorb hits. Goalies have to make saves. And the more energy you exert, the less energy you're going to have the rest of the game. Yes, you'll go back to the bench, you'll suck wind for a minute and a half, and then you'll go back out there when it's your shift again. But that type of territorial control and maintaining offensive zone time for extended periods of time is a really strong foundation. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Flyers and creating off the counter, because the Martone goal is a perfect example of what I'm thinking when I'm trying to game plan out what the Flyers recipe and particularly offensively, is in this series if they're going to beat the Penguins. But you're going to have to make concessions somewhere in your philosophy as a team in the postseason. You cannot rest on your laurels, and you don't have enough time to wait for it to figure itself out. You know, in an 82 game regular season, you're going to have a bad week. You're going to have maybe a bad month. And over the course of 82 games, if you're consistently doing the right things, more often than not, you will get enough outcomes to break your way that you will be rewarded. But in a best of 7 series, you can't just stick to your process if it's not working. Now, it's early. Everyone has played one game other than the Oilers and Ducks, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. But you do not have the luxury of time. You do not have the luxury of, this will sort itself out, I'm not worried. Now, you're down 1-0 in your series. You're Pittsburgh. You're the Stars. You're the Bruins. Not the end of the world. It happens. Someone has to win game 1. The team that wins game 1 usually wins the series. I think it's 60-something%, they said on one of the ESPN broadcasts over the weekend. So it helps. 61-39 is not an insignificant margin. That is pretty good. Most people would take that 60% odds for winning the series. But when you are down in a game, and I wanted to start there because the Martone goal is a direct product of that. The Penguins spend a good chunk of that game down a goal or tied, and you get to a certain point in the game where, because it's a playoff game and we're not playing for overtime, we're not playing for the loser point, you're going to have to start getting the gears going. You're going to have to start being more aggressive. And for Pittsburgh, on the Martone goal, Rasmus Ristolainen makes a really nice pass. And when Ristolainen sends that pass up ice to the neutral zone where Travis Konechny's waiting for it, there are 3 Penguin players equal to or behind the puck. So there's one person behind Ristolainen, there's one person coming down on him head on, and then there's one person directly to his left. As soon as that puck gets up ice, that means you have a numbers advantage. And when you're chasing the game, you are going to have to over pursue the puck. You are going to have to go for 2-on-1s or 3-on-1s on forechecks to try and create that offensive zone time. And the second Ristolainen lets that puck go and he gets the pass off, it's a really nice pass to get off under that type of sustained pressure. You have an advantage if you're the Flyers because you have numbers now. No matter what, you got that puck up the ice. There are 3 Penguins behind the puck trailing the play. Now, you are more or less off, and Konechny makes a really smart play by drawing a Pittsburgh defender to him, leaving the puck in the neutral zone. Martone can gather the puck with speed, kind of what we typically see teams do on power play regroups where they'll leave that puck behind in the defensive zone. The forward who's going to try and gain the zone entry is going to build up that head of steam, pick up the puck, gain the zone with speed, which is what Martone does. When Martone gathers that puck, it's a 2-on-1. There's a Pittsburgh defender, and he has an outlet pass to Martone's left. Streaking through the neutral zone as hard as he can is Noel Acciari of the Penguins. Acciari is a forward. He's coming back on the back check to try and prevent that 2-on-1 cross-seam pass. Acciari, to his credit, does a good enough job that he is able to stop Martone from getting that pass across and stop Martone from driving the net directly. But where the advantage comes in, if you're Martone in that situation, there are still 3 Penguins players behind the play. So at minimum, with you and one other person in the offensive zone, it's even. It's 2 defenders, 2 forwards. And being that one of the 2 Penguins players back is a forward who is skating backwards, not his forte, as it would be if it were a defenseman, you have an advantage. And Martone throws on the brakes hard. He pigeon hooks at the right circle. Acciari manages to get in front of him, turns forward facing the play back to the goalie, and Martone has enough room because he stopped short enough to rifle home as good a shot as you saw all weekend. And that entire sequence is a byproduct of the Penguins being able to, the Flyers being able to absorb pressure well, to counterattack when the opportunity arises, and then it's a good example of what we talk about when we say score impacts. The score of the game dictates how aggressive you're going to play and what you're trying to do. The Penguins down a goal, less than 10 minutes to go in the third period. They need to push for offense. They need to try and drag this game for overtime. So they're going to be okay with taking that risk on the forecheck of having two guys on the puck carrier to try and keep the puck down in the offensive zone, to try and sustain time, to try and get to that eventual scoring chance that could tie the game for them. If you're Pittsburgh, it's not great that your forwards flew the zone as early as they did on the sequence, but to Ristolainen's credit, he makes a really nice pass, and you get off to the races. For the Flyers, they are going to have to get comfortable living off of the rush, and this is the antithesis of what Rick Tocchet wants from his teams at large. Now, we have seen since the Olympic break a concerted effort from Rick Tocchet's team to get more controlled breakouts, to get more opportunities to create off of the rush, because we all know, and you don't think of defense being part of offense because they are two unique game states when your team has the puck versus when it doesn't, but they are downstream of each other. If your team is consistently breaking out cleanly, you are playing less defense. You are helping your team's offense as a defender, and that doesn't involve being an Evan Bouchard or a Lane Hudson where you're walking the blue line and you have a great shot and you've got great instincts so you can get the puck where you need to passing. No, that is an example of the type of link-up play, the type of cohesion you want to see structurally from your team if they're going to go on a run. So much of playoff hockey is split-second decisions. You have to make a gut call under less than ideal circumstances, and how those circumstances play out usually defines these games. We are talking about razor-thin margins of error where you send a pass half a second too soon or half a second too late, and the play doesn't work, and you're trapped in your own end again. But to Rick Tocchet's credit, the Flyers were not in survival mode on Saturday night. They went on the road to Pittsburgh, a loud building, and slowly but surely got control of the game. They outshot the Penguins in 2 of the 3 periods in the game. They had a better expected goal share. They had a better high danger chance share. But what put the game away was the organized, controlled breakouts that you are going to need to live on as a defense-first team. Forward talent-wise, Zegras, Michkov, it's going to annoy me to no end how little Michkov gets to play because Rick Tocchet just doesn't trust his defense, even though he's very clearly a gifted player. But Martone and Konechny did a very nice job there. Zegras and Owen Tippett, I really like what they are capable of. The Flyers showed you they understand, at least at a baseline level, what they need to do to be successful offensively, because they aren't going to be able to create offense at the rate or the volume of a lot of the other teams we're going to see in the postseason. But you do need to be able to capitalize on those handful of good chances. And that's the benefit of having the individual shooting talent. If you have a Porter Martone or an Owen Tippett or a Trevor Zegras who's an above-average shooter, they don't need as good of a scoring chance to register a goal. The Martone shot is a pretty benign scoring chance, but being that he's got a plus shot, being that the goalie was moving because they were trying to prevent the cross-seam pass from being a real threat to score, Martone is able to take advantage of his really good shot, put his team in a favorable position, and they win the game. That's the beautiful thing, and it's one of the real conundrums we have in talking about playoff hockey, because we're dealing with such small samples and a lot of people are only going to look at the result. It's not as easy for me to convince people, hey, what the Flyers did, X, Y, and Z is sustainable, or it's not. What the Flyers did on Saturday night, they did a really nice job, especially defensively, and that gave them a real path to victory. Now, one of the beautiful things about the playoffs, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, the game within the game. How easily can the Penguins adjust to what Pittsburgh did? How easy can the Penguins adjust to what the Flyers did? Where can the Penguins be better defensively? The Chris Letang pair struggled mightily in game one, and really gave the Penguins nothing. It's crazy to think about, being that Chris Letang is almost certainly going to be a future Hall of Famer, but he and Samuel Girard had about as miserable of a game one as you can realistically expect. I'm clicking on over here to my notes. Chris Letang had 12% of the expected goal share in the game. I know I had said 2% earlier. That must have been earlier in the game. 12.71%, which is about as rough as you're going to see. Him, Connor Dewar, Sam Girard, Blake Lizotte, that what we have seen be the Penguins' fourth line this season really had a hard time. Chris Letang was on the ice for 3 goals, all 3 goals against at even strength, and was really a net negative, and something you've heard a lot from people who cover the Penguins and Penguins fans alike is, can Chris Letang adapt to and understand where his skill set is at now? This is, I won't say it's exactly the same as what we saw with PK Subban, but it's the same general idea. This is at once a supremely physically talented guy, really explosive, really agile, really fluid movement, very similarly to PK Subban. Subban, after dealing with some knee injuries, some ankle injuries, didn't have the same foot speed. So he couldn't make the same gambles he had once upon a time. He can't make those decisions the way he used to. He needs to reinform his calculus, his decision-making, how aggressive he's going to be, how passive he's going to be, to better suit where his skating is at now. Chris Letang is a pretty good penalty killer. He's a pretty good puck battler. But he also needs to understand his limitations now, because he was an active detriment to the Penguins' chances of winning on Saturday night. Now, that Islander way idea of springing off the counter, the types of goals you saw Barzal, the types of goals you saw Anthony Bolivier score a lot during those playoff runs, that's a hard way to live. You don't want to spend the majority of your games getting outshot 40-25, but you can get by doing that if you're able to convert on the handful of chances you get. And on Saturday night, they got 2 goals from defensemen in Drysdale and Travis Sanheim. The Sanheim goal was really nice. It was a good showcase of what sets Sanheim apart from a lot of other guys his size, because of the fluidity of his movement. He was able to dip his shoulder, get underneath that Pittsburgh player, drive the net and score. And then Drysdale just hits a good shot. You get goals from defensemen and you get goals from rookies. Those are areas that you didn't write in pen when you were trying to game out how you're going to win this series if you're the Flyers. But going into a game 2 tonight, where you're going to have that Pittsburgh team a little bit on edge, and you'll need to see if Pittsburgh can adapt, I think the Flyers have shown you, at least in the opening salvo, that they are not just happy to be here, that they really do have a good chance of winning this series outright. Okay. Quick hitters. Minnesota mud stomps Dallas. Nothing you can do if you're Dallas at that point. You get down 3-0 to a team like Minnesota that's as deep as they are, especially on the back end, with Jesper Wallstad, who's been really good for them. I was a little surprised he got the start, but I do get it. When you are going into the playoffs, you want to ride the hotter hand, and Wallstad had been a little bit better down the stretch. The big story for me, I had Thomas Harley as the Stars' X factor going into this series. He got outscored 3-0 on Saturday. He was probably the worst defenseman on the ice, and the 3 goals he's on the ice for against aren't particularly dangerous scoring chances. They're sharp angle flanks. There's a redirection in there, but there was a lot of conjecture going into this series. Will they keep Nils Lundkvist with Thomas Harley? Nils Lundkvist is a former first-round pick, 27th overall a couple years ago. He hasn't really been a full-time NHLer up until this season. Pete DeBoer would consistently healthy scratch him, only get him 12, 13 minutes a game as a defenseman. And this year was the first real sustained time we saw for Lundkvist, and he and Harley had a rough go of it. Now, the goals against aren't exactly the most stinging of indictments for those guys. They're pretty good shots that go in, but you're on the ice for 3 goals against, and you're Thomas Harley. You're supposed to be this team's second best defenseman. That's not going to work. And look, on paper, Dallas looks like a better team. We'll see if Rope Hintz can get back in the lineup for game number 3. The assumption is he's not playing game 2, that he'll be back for game number 3 when the series shifts up to Minnesota. But down the middle, that'll be the advantage the Stars will have going forward, where they can run Johnston, Hintz, and Matt Duchene against Joel Eriksson, Ryan Hartman, and then whichever Foligno happens to be playing third line, or Michael McCarron for that matter. There's an opportunity there for Dallas. We need to see if Jake Ottinger can be good. And Ottinger is weird because he's got that one great playoff series under his belt against Calgary from 4 years ago now. He's had some really good individual seasons, especially in terms of goals saved above expected. But he's also been outplayed by Stuart Skinner in 2 straight conference finals, and he was pretty bad on Saturday. Some of the goals, especially that Kaprizov sharp angle shot, he probably should have had. We'll see what goes on there. I mean, Pete DeBoer a little vindicated based on how last year's conference finals went after one game, but we'll see. Carolina, Ottawa, that's not very fun hockey to watch. There's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of scoring chances. Both of those teams are very happy to muck it up. There's a reason Brady Tkachuk fought Jordan Staal before the game started. Those two teams are very similar in that sense. Ultimately, that series comes down to whether or not Ullmark can make some saves. We'll see if Ottawa can find ways to get their offense going a little bit easier, but you probably lose that game 1-0, even if Ullmark does make the save on Stankoven. So you had the goal taken away from you. You had that puck you thought cross the goal line, get overturned on review. So I'm not as worried about Ottawa as I would be if I were, say, Dallas, who had a really rough go of it. For Buffalo, it's a sick win. I don't have much more of my analysis beyond the Sabres have better players. Tage scores 2, and then Matthias Samuelsson, somebody who's had a really underrated year this year, one of the better goals above replacement, players in the entire league on the back end, scores the goal to win the game. And that Sabres team, they showed you gumption coming back from the 2-goal deficit. They showed you their high-end talent, Tage picking up a pair, and they showed you their depth, getting getting the Samuelsson goal from a defenseman. When you can get goals from whether it's your bottom 6 or from defensemen or rookies or unproven guys, those are factors you're not banking on. Those are positive forces breaking your way, and that's highly encouraging. Swayman was really good for the Bruins. The Sabres had a majority of the scoring chances, a majority of the high dangers, and the expected goals. And Swayman kept them in that game for a long time. He had them with a 2-0 lead with less than 10 minutes to go in the third, and ultimately the Bruins couldn't find that put-away goal, and it gave Buffalo just enough room to get back into the mix. Okay, last thing we'll talk about on today's show before we pivot to just adjustments and general curiosities going forward. Anaheim and Edmonton starts tonight, the last playoff series to start. I think the Oilers are a better team. I think the series largely gets decided on special teams. The Oilers had the NHL's best power play in the regular season. We'll see. I'm assuming Draisaitl's going to play. Now, it could be gamesmanship. The Oilers just trying to psych the Ducks out a little bit. Maybe Leon's going to play, make the Ducks try and account for that. Maybe he won't. Based on the fact he's been practicing for the better part of a week and a half, it leads me to believe Draisaitl is going to go for game number 1. He's a player we've seen gut out some pretty tough injuries. He had that really bad ankle sprain, I think it was 4 years ago now, where he had 30 points in 16 playoff games. So Leon will go if he's even close to being able to. And that just opens up a lot of doors for the Oilers, because if they go McDavid, Draisaitl, Dickinson, and then Henrique, I would prefer Szymanski to Henrique at 4th line center. But if they go with Henrique, that's as deep as they've been down the middle all year. It lets Nugent Hopkins play on the wing, deeper in the lineup, where he might be able to get a little bit more out of his role than if he were playing on McDavid's left. It keeps Savoy on the first line with McDavid and Hyman. You get Chris Knobloch's ideal second line of Podkolzin and Draisaitl Kapanen, which outscored opponents 12-2 at even strength this year, which is supremely encouraging. And then you had that Colton Dach, Josh Szymanski, Trent Frederick 4th line really going well down the backstretch of the regular season, where you saw them outscore opponents 3-0 at 5-on-5. So the Oilers have enough forward depth where I feel reasonably okay should Draisaitl play. On the back end, Nurse and Connor Murphy, they've outscored opponents 8-6 since Murphy got there, which isn't world-beating, but it's more than adequate for what they're going to ask that second pair to do. For me, when it comes to Oiler weaknesses, that third defensive pair of Jake Wallman and Ty Emberson, it has work to do. It hasn't been great at 5-on-5. Neither of those guys is particularly good at clearing the net front, at establishing a physical presence around the net front, and they've been beat a lot on rebounds, on deflections, and on second chances because they don't have the physical capacity to clear out that space. Both guys a little bit on the undersized end of things. Both guys not particularly physical players. We know Jake Wallman has dealt with injuries a lot this year. He's missed 20-ish games. He's never really been a full 82-game player at any point in his career, but the Oilers have committed to him long-term. He's got a 7-year deal that kicks in this upcoming summer, so the Oilers are really hoping Wallman can figure it out and put together the type of play they expect from a player they're committing to going into the future. For the Ducks side of things, and it's the complete opposite of the Oilers in the respect that the Oilers' best players, McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Ekholm, Bouchard, those are all guys with the significant playoff experience on this team. You go down the lineup, you look at the depth, Murphy, Dickinson, Savoy, a lot of the supporting cast members on this team lack playoff experience, and there's a little bit of concern there. On the other end, if you're looking at the Ducks, where you have Kreider and Killorn and Trouba, those guys are playing supporting cast roles. John Carlson as well, who I didn't mention a second ago. A lot of the experience, especially playoff experience in the lineup, is represented by guys who are second pair or bottom six forwards, and that creates a unique dichotomy where Joel Quenneville is going to need to get over any phobias about these young guys playing big roles, because if the Ducks are going to win this series, they are going to need their best players. Cutter Gauthier, who right now it looks like is going to start on their third line, which is crazy because he's scored 40 goals. Leo Carlson is going to try his best to defend McDavid and or Draisaitl. You have Troy Terry. You have enough forward talent that this is an interesting series. The Ducks have just enough scoring talent that they can maybe open this up, maybe make the Oilers play a little more defense than they'd be comfortable doing, putting a little more pressure on Connor Ingram maybe than the Oilers would like. And that's your sauce if you're Anaheim. You need to turn this into a high-scoring track meet. If you're the Oilers, you're probably going to want to try and slow this down and do a little bit of what you were doing the 15 games or so Draisaitl was out, where you're playing a lot more offensive zone time, you're working the cycle, you're trying to bleed the game out to some degree, and it's going to be a challenge because the Oilers and Ducks in the regular season this year played 3 really high-scoring games. The Oilers won 2, the Ducks won 1. The one big blowout win the Oilers had was a game Leo Carlson wasn't dressed for the Ducks because he was hurt. So we'll see on that series. I think the Oilers win that series in 6 games. Keep an eye on Matt Savoy, who's been the Oilers' best supporting cast member in Draisaitl's absence. More points in those 24 games than he had in the previous 58, all 82 games in his first NHL season. I want to see if Chris Knoblauch can be patient. He dressed a really funky lineup in game 1 last year against the Kings, and it took all of 5-6 minutes and like 2 shifts to change it up. So I want to see Chris Knoblauch keep it together and really let his lineup find its shape. It's been one of the recurring storylines for the Oilers this year, the fact that they haven't had that consistent of a lineup for long stretches of time. Some of it a product of injury, some of it a product of necessity. Okay, what to watch for tonight? If you're Edmonton, Anaheim, can Anaheim stay out of the penalty box? They take the 4th most penalties in the league. The Oilers have the best power play in the NHL. Stay out of the penalty box there. If you're Ottawa, you need to stay out of the penalty box, especially because Carolina has a pretty good power play. And if you are Ottawa, you want to give Linus Ullmark the best possible circumstances to be successful. We know he's capable. He had a .909 save in his last 10 starts in the regular season. When Ullmark is good, he's very good. He's a former Vezina Trophy winner. If you're Pittsburgh, can you get on offense and really force the Flyers to only live off the counter? The Flyers had a majority of the possession in the dangerous offense in the game last Saturday, which is something I wasn't expecting. Now, can Pittsburgh adapt, get a little more game control, really try and put pressure on Philly to play good defense, on Daniel Vladar to make high-end saves? Minnesota, Dallas has to score first. If you're Dallas going in, and I know that's a very unimportant factor in ultimately who's going to win that series, but if you're Dallas, you got your doors blown off at home on Saturday. You want to score early. You want to get the crowd into the game. You want to get your feet under you. You want to give yourself a chance to adjust for whatever's going to come, because that's a series where those two teams have the talent. where it can be Rocky and Apollo just trading bombs for 4 or 5 or 6 games down the road here. And there's enough talent on both of those teams where we could see the wild ebbs and flows of blowouts in opposite directions because there is that much talent on each of these teams. Now, Minnesota is a pretty strong defensive team, and it has the best goalie tandem in the playoffs. It might be pretty hard for Dallas to turn this into a seesaw game of blowouts because of those environmental circumstances. But if you're Dallas, get on the board early, get your feet under you, and give yourself a chance. When you're down 3-4-0 in a playoff game midway through the second period, you shut it down at a certain point because you start to become worried about the next game. It's one of the real struggles you have in the Stanley Cup playoffs when you're not able to get knocked out effectively. And I always make that comparison that's the rough part about hockey versus boxing or MMA, because in boxing or MMA, when you get knocked out, at least it's over. You get to go back, you lick your wounds, and you come back in a couple months to have another fight. In hockey, you're down 4-0 in the second period. You got to sit there and take it. And you have to make strategic concessions, and you have to say, well, we probably can't come back in this game, so we're going to not shut it down, but we're playing at 75, 80%. And if we get one, then we start to dial it up and get going again. But through the first weekend, you saw a lot of good hockey. You saw some boring hockey. Carolina and Ottawa, I'm looking at you. But there is plenty to still discuss. There's plenty to still understand. The only series pick right now I don't feel great about is Ottawa over Carolina. Other than that, Dallas, we saw last year, they got smoked in game 1 against Colorado. They were able to come back and win that series in 7. I did pick the Penguins, but I think long run, they're probably better. But we'll see. That's the beauty of the playoffs. We're really going to learn a lot about these teams over the course of the next week. I will probably pop in with another reaction episode to games as we go along throughout the week, and sporadic. If I notice something, a trend, a stat or something, I'll do that too. I will talk to you guys real soon. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Subscribe to the Discord channel, which is down in the link on YouTube. Sign up for the Substack. Be greatly appreciated. All of this stuff is part of the one overarching theory of trying to make hockey a little more accessible and informative for everyone. I'll talk to you guys real soon. Until then, enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs.